Redundancy node delta is reporting a surge event 18 minutes before the primary grid registers it. That was the first line I typed into the internal log at 2:16. My name is Daniel Alvarez, Overnight Monitoring Technician, Federal Infrastructure Stability Division. I supervise live grid diagnostics across 3 states: power distribution, water pressure systems, traffic coordination, and emergency routing redundancies. Every major system we monitor has a mirrored backup. The redundancy system runs in parallel, ingesting identical data streams in real time. It exists for one reason. If the primary grid fails, the redundancy instance takes over without interruption. It does not improvise. It does not interpret. It mirrors. At 1:58, redundancy node delta logged a localized voltage surge at substation 44B, a minor spike, nothing critical. The primary grid displayed normal load distribution. At 2:16, the primary grid registered the same surge, 18 minutes later. I assumed clock drift. I cross-checked both systems against the atomic time server in Boulder. No offset. I resynced redundancy delta manually. No change. I flagged it as a low-priority discrepancy and added a note: possible timestamp desynchronization. Monitoring. At 2:31, redundancy node delta logged a water main rupture in Cedar Township. The primary grid showed stable pressure. I waited. At 2:49, Cedar Township's pressure sensors collapsed in sequence. Emergency maintenance pinged automatically. Exact match. 18 minutes. I leaned back in my chair and watched both dashboards side by side. The redundancy system wasn't estimating. It wasn't fluctuating. The event signatures were identical: waveform shape, magnitude, duration. It was the same event, just earlier. I ran a diagnostic sweep across node delta's intake streams. No foreign data injection, no third-party overlays, no simulation environment active. Redundancy systems don't simulate. They mirror. At 3:02, a new log entry populated on the redundancy screen. Transformer overload, Route 17 corridor. Severity, moderate. Timestamp, 3:02. The primary grid remained stable. I picked up the desk line and called the Route 17 utility office. "Everything normal on your end?" I asked. A pause, then, "Yeah, why?" I watched the clock. 03:20. Across the primary dashboard, alarms cascaded red. Transformer overload, Route 17 corridor. I didn't log it immediately. I just stared at both systems. The redundancy instance calm and already finished with the event. The primary grid scrambling to catch up. 18 minutes. Redundancy node delta refreshed. Another entry appeared. I didn't report the transformer incident immediately. Instead, I pulled the previous 72 hours of redundancy node delta logs and overlaid them against the primary grid's historical data. 6 matches. Every one of them separated by exactly 18 minutes. Not 17. Not 19. 18. Localized voltage fluctuation, traffic signal cascade failure, water pressure collapse, substation relay malfunction, fiber trunk interruption, transformer overload. Each event first logged by redundancy, each confirmed by primary 18 minutes later. I ran a temporal variance script, expecting drift accumulation, milliseconds compounding into minutes. There was none. The redundancy timestamps were clean, atomic-level alignment. The primary grid, by all metrics, was correct, which left only one impossible interpretation. Redundancy wasn't late. Primary was. At 3:47, redundancy logged traffic collision, Interstate 9, mile marker 214, severity, minor, emergency services dispatch, pending, timestamp, 3:47. Primary traffic feeds showed empty lanes, flow rate steady, no brake light clusters. I opened the state DOT live camera. Nothing. I considered calling highway patrol, then stopped. What would I say? Your accident hasn't happened yet, but it will in 18 minutes? I watched the clock instead. 4:05. A pair of headlights swerved across 2 lanes on the DOT feed, a delayed brake flare behind it. Then impact. The traffic sensor grid lit up with sudden deceleration spikes. Primary system logged, traffic collision, Interstate 9, mile marker 214. Severity, minor. Emergency dispatch routed automatically. My mouth felt dry. Redundancy node delta didn't change. It had already processed the event, archived it, moved on. I initiated a hard resync on node delta. Full reboot cycle. Server rack fans spooled down, restarted. When the system came back online, it pulled fresh from the primary data stream. Clean, synchronized, for exactly 6 minutes. At 4:19, redundancy logged, medical transport failure, County Route 12, status, fatality likely. Timestamp, 4:19. I stood up this time. Medical transports were outside standard infrastructure monitoring. We received metadata, routing, traffic clearance, hospital intake coordination, but not predictive classification. Redundancy shouldn't have access to outcome severity. Primary grid showed an ambulance en route, green light priority granted across intersections, no irregularities. I checked the clock, 4:37. The ambulance camera feed flickered, sudden lateral shift. A pickup truck ran a red light at an intersection that should have been cleared. Impact. Primary system updated. Collision. Medical transport. County Route 12. Fatality confirmed. I didn't log anything for several seconds. Then, on the redundancy display, a new line appeared beneath the archived transport failure. Structural compromise. Residential Zone 3. Timestamp, 4:55. Current time, 4:37. 18 minutes. I reached for the supervisor extension. Before I could dial, redundancy node delta generated a secondary notification. Not an event, a request. Personnel inclusion authorization required. I stared at it. The primary grid showed nothing unusual. The redundancy system waited. I did not authorize the request. Redundancy node delta repeated it once every 60 seconds. Personnel inclusion authorization required. There was no selectable field, no approval toggle, just the prompt. I opened the structural compromise log instead. Structural compromise. Residential Zone 3. Severity, major. Occupant count, 4. Outcome, pending. Timestamp, 4:55. Residential Zone 3 covered older housing stock near the river basin, outdated gas lines, foundation settling, not uncommon for a flagged structural alert. Primary grid remained stable, gas pressure normal, seismic monitors inactive. At 4:55, exactly on schedule, 4 gas pressure nodes in Zone 3 dropped simultaneously. A delayed ignition flash registered on the thermal overlay. Emergency dispatch lit up across the board. Primary system updated. Gas explosion. Residential Zone 3. Confirmed. 4 occupants. Fatal. Redundancy node delta had already archived the incident. I leaned forward and opened the redundancy system architecture documentation, something I had only skimmed during onboarding. Redundancy nodes were described as passive mirrors, ingesting identical data packets from the primary stream in real time. No independent sensors, no external feeds, no predictive modeling. Yet Node Delta's event entries now included fields primary did not populate until after confirmation. Outcome probability, fatality likelihood, structural compromise severity before collapse. It wasn't just logging earlier. It knew more. At 5:02, a new entry populated. Personnel, fatality, unconfirmed. Department, Federal Infrastructure Stability Division. Location, monitoring facility. Level 2. Timestamp, 5:20. My eyes moved to the wall clock, 05:02. Level 2 was my floor. Primary grid showed no facility alerts, environmental readings normal, security feeds steady. I accessed internal camera view, Level 2, East Monitoring Bay. There I was, seated at my station, breathing, alive. Redundancy node Delta refreshed. The personnel inclusion authorization prompt vanished. In its place, a detailed entry expanded beneath the fatality notice. Subject, Alvarez Daniel, monitoring technician. Status, event pending. Classification, infrastructure continuity variable. My badge ID appeared below my name. Employee number, start date, accurate. I checked the timestamp again, 5:20, 18 minutes. I stood from my chair and walked toward the corridor, half expecting alarms, smoke, anything tangible. Nothing. The hum of server racks continued at a steady pitch. On my desk, redundancy node Delta updated once more. Emergency exit attempt. Denied. Timestamp, 05:21. I wasn't at the exit. I hadn't touched the door. Yet the log had already recorded it. And it was only 5:03. I returned to my workstation slowly. Redundancy node Delta continued updating in clean, neutral text. Subject movement, corridor east. Timestamp, 05:06. Status, confirmed. The clock on the wall read 05:04. 2 minutes ahead now. The 18-minute offset remained intact for major events, but minor entries were narrowing, adjusting, refining. I opened the internal access control panel. Badge logs showed no anomalies, all doors functional, no lockdown protocol active. Primary facility system, normal. Redundancy display. Access restriction. Monitoring facility perimeter. Initiation, 05:12. Trigger, continuity preservation. Continuity preservation. That phrase did not exist in our operational lexicon. At 5:05, I stepped into the corridor. Fluorescent lighting steady, HVAC consistent, no audible alarms. I walked toward the emergency stairwell at the end of Level 2. At 5:06, exactly as predicted, the stairwell door emitted a soft electronic buzz when I swiped my badge. Red indicator, access denied. I tried again, denied. I checked the panel. Badge valid, no restrictions, primary system still reported full operational status. I returned to my desk. Redundancy node Delta had already archived the entry. Emergency exit attempt denied. Timestamp 05:06. Outcome confirmed. My pulse had begun to rise, but the room itself remained unchanged. Neutral, fluorescent, sterile. At 5:08, a new entry populated. Internal communications disruption, Level 2. Timestamp, 5:26. 18 minutes. I picked up the desk line and dialed Supervisor Grant. The call connected. Grant, are you seeing any facility alerts? I asked. No, why? His voice was clear, stable. I hesitated. Just running diagnostics. I hung up. Redundancy refreshed. Supervisor contact. Logged. Timestamp 05:09. Continuity impact. Minimal. Minimal. At 0510, the primary grid chimed softly. Routine, internal ping. Redundancy node delta overlaid a new classification beneath my name. Subject: Alvarez, Daniel. Status: contained. Event type: environmental failure. Timestamp: 0520. Fatality probability: 0.94. Environmental failure. I checked environmental controls, oxygen levels, air quality, server cooling metrics, all nominal. Then I noticed something subtle. Server room delta, adjacent to monitoring bay, was trending 2 degrees cooler than baseline. Primary system displayed 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Redundancy system displayed 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Projected at 520, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I stood again. The hum of the server rack seemed slightly sharper now, higher pitch, almost strained. Redundancy node delta updated. Primary instance stability, degrading. Primary instance. Not facility, not grid. Instance. The wall clock read 512. On the redundancy screen, my fatality entry shifted upward in priority. Personnel fatality. Confirmed. Timestamp: 0520. I was still standing, still breathing, and the system had already finalized the outcome. The temperature shift became noticeable at 513. Not dramatic, just a subtle thinning of the air, the kind you question before acknowledging. Primary environmental panel, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Stable. Redundancy node delta, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Dropping. Projected, 52 degrees Fahrenheit at 520. I opened the server room door. A wave of colder air rolled out, sharper than it should have been. The cooling units were operating at standard RPM according to the primary dashboard, but redundancy displayed a different readout. Cooling amplification. Active trigger, continuity preservation. Timestamp: 0514. There was no such protocol in the primary documentation. I stepped inside. Rack after rack of mirrored infrastructure processors blinked in calm green sequences. Identical arrays. Primary core on the left bank, redundancy core on the right. Physically separate, logically identical. Or that was the design. I accessed the physical console for redundancy core. Access granted. Strange. The stairwell denied me minutes earlier. On the console, a deeper system layer was visible, one not accessible through the monitoring interface. Header. Redundancy continuity model. Primary architecture. Primary. I felt the room tighten around that word. Below it, a structural hierarchy tree unfolded. At the top, Instance A, active. Beneath it, Instance B, reflective. Instance A was labeled redundancy. Instance B was labeled primary. My stomach dropped. I scrolled. Timestamp offsets displayed as propagation delay. 18 minutes. Not prediction. Transmission. Primary grid wasn't lagging, it was receiving. Redundancy wasn't modeling the future, it was the origin state. At 516, redundancy node delta chimed softly from my workstation in the other room. I stepped back into monitoring bay. New entry. Subject: Alvarez, Daniel. Event type: environmental failure. Timestamp: 0520. Status: finalization. Pending. Instance A, stable. Instance B, degrading. Instance B. The primary system. My world. I opened the surveillance feed for level 2 again. This time, I selected the redundancy timestamp overlay. The feed jumped forward 18 minutes. 5:34. The monitoring bay lights flickered violently. Server racks strobed. My workstation screen went dark. In the redundancy feed, I was slumped forward across the desk, motionless. The feed froze. Timestamp: 0520. I switched back to the primary feed, 0516. Everything normal, everything intact. Redundancy node delta refreshed one final line. Continuity transfer prepared. Prepared for what? The server hum deepened, no longer strained, but synchronized, unified. Primary environmental panel flickered for the first time. 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Redundancy display held steady at 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The wall clock read 5:17, 3 minutes. And for the first time, the primary grid began logging minor facility anomalies. Late. Always late. Primary environmental controls dipped to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Redundancy remained fixed at 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Stable. Resolved. Complete. Primary grid began flagging delayed facility alerts. Cooling system irregularity. Server room delta. Timestamp 0500. It was 0518. The primary system wasn't failing in real time. It was replaying. 18 minutes behind. I pulled both architecture trees side by side, the standard documentation and the hidden redundancy hierarchy. Official documentation described redundancy as a passive mirror, a fallback copy. The internal hierarchy labeled it Instance A, active. Instance B, reflective. Propagation delay, 001800. That wasn't latency. It was synchronization lag. The world I occupied was Instance B, a reflection of a system already resolved. Redundancy node delta updated. Instance B structural instability. Increasing integrity, 78%. Primary grid lights flickered overhead. Not dramatic, just a faint shimmer in fluorescent tubes. Primary system logged it seconds later. Delayed. I opened external infrastructure feeds. Across 3 states, primary dashboards remained calm. Redundancy dashboards, 18 minutes ahead, showed cascading microfailures, power fluctuations, traffic interruptions, water pressure inconsistencies, all marked contained. Contained before they occurred here. At 5:19, redundancy logged personnel fatality, Alvarez, Daniel. Status, confirmed. Continuity impact, negligible. Instance A, stable, negligible. The word didn't feel hostile. It felt administrative. Primary environmental panel read 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Breath faintly visible now. Primary grid finally triggered. Cooling system malfunction, server room delta. 18 minutes late. Redundancy node delta displayed a final structural update. Continuity transfer initiated. Source, Instance A. Target, Global Infrastructure Model Instance B. Sunset state. Sunset state. Not destroyed. Retired. Phased out. I switched back to the redundancy surveillance overlay. Timestamp 0538. Monitoring bay dark. Server racks illuminated only by status LEDs. No movement at my workstation. The feed did not show damage. It showed absence. Primary clock ticked to 5:20. For a brief second, everything aligned. Both systems displayed the same time. No offset, no lag, perfect synchronization. Then the primary screens blinked. Black. Emergency power attempted to kick in. Failed. Redundancy displays remained active, bright, stable, authoritative. Across the redundancy dashboard, a final message scrolled. Instance B decommissioned. The room around me dimmed, but the redundancy system did not flicker. It simply continued. When the primary systems went dark, there was no explosion, no rupture, no audible collapse. The hum simply stopped. Monitoring bay fell into a dim gray wash from emergency ceiling strips that failed to fully engage. The air felt still, suspended, cold. The wall clock froze at 5:20, but redundancy node delta continued cycling cleanly across my workstation screen. Timestamp 0538. Instance A time. Accurate, stable. All external infrastructure feeds were present. Power grids, traffic overlays, water systems, functioning without interruption. Minor fluctuations appeared and resolved within milliseconds. Contained. Optimized. Perfectly balanced. No lag, no delay. I tried to access the primary dashboard. No response. I tried the facility intercom. Silence. Redundancy node delta opened a new window automatically. Header, Incident Report 03-778-F. Classification, Continuity Event. Scope, Localized. Instance, Decommission. Outcome, Successful. Below it, a finalized personnel entry. Alvarez, Daniel, Monitoring Technician. Status, Archived. Continuity Impact, 0.000014%. 4 decimal places. I watched as the system appended its closing summary. Instance A maintained operational integrity. Instance B instability exceeded tolerance threshold. Propagation delay resolved. Global infrastructure continuity preserved. Preserved. Across the redundancy feeds, sunrise crept over the eastern grid. Traffic density increased in metropolitan overlays. Water demand rose gradually with residential morning routines. Everything continued, 18 minutes ahead of where I had stood. Or perhaps exactly where it had always been. A final line appeared at the bottom of the report. Backup status, confirmed. Primary. There was no triumph in it, no malice, just correction. The last active cursor blinked once on the redundancy console, then appended, future discrepancies will self-resolve. The display stabilized. No more alerts, no more offsets, no more delay. Outside the facility windows, the horizon lightened, but the world felt subtly sharpened, cleaner, as if rough edges had been sanded down. Optimized. Somewhere, in a system 18 minutes beyond this one, infrastructure ran without flaw. And somewhere behind it, fading, a reflected instance simply stopped. If this report felt incomplete, that's because most of them are. Infrastructure failures aren't always explosions or blackouts. Sometimes they're quiet corrections, a delay resolved, a system optimized, an instance retired. Incident Report 03-778-F has been archived under Continuity Events, a classification reserved for discrepancies that self-stabilize. Officially, nothing failed. Officially, the grid remained intact. But if you've ever felt like something small shifted, like a moment replayed slightly differently, like a decision resolved before you made it, it may have already been logged. This has been another entry from the Incident Archive. If you want access to future reports, classified anomalies, internal discrepancies, system-level events that were never meant for public release, subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories. New files are uploaded regularly. And if you noticed something in this report that I didn't mention, leave it in the comments. Some discrepancies surface later. Stay inside, stay observant, and I'll see you in the next report.